our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Good evening, and may the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. And this is our episode 25 on the subject, Where is the Hope of the World? I would like to read answer number 3, page 30. The Lord has often made manifest in His providence, says the Spirit of prophecy, that nothing less than revealed truth, the Word of God, can reclaim man from sin or keep him from transgression. I would like to read 2TG number 30, page 15. It says, Let us once and forever realize that the devil is more shrewd than we can imagine. He is not particular what you believe, so long as he can keep you ignorant of revealed truth. And White House Recruiter, page 31 and page 32, it says, Let us not, however, forget that there is an enemy who is determined to keep God's people in darkness, in ignorance of timely truth. And what more damaging darkness could he seek to keep them in than in ignorance of that which God would have them to know, while their judgment is pending? While there being weighed in the balances of the sanctuary, none, absolutely none. White House Recruiter, page 31 and page 32. So, the devil is determined to keep God's people in darkness and in ignorance of timely truth. And there is no more damaging darkness rather than to keep God's people in ignorance concerning the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, while their cases are pending and they are not aware of. That's why in track number 3, on page 54, it says, For when a person's judgment is pending and he is unaware of the fact, he will be unprepared and unable to stand when his case is investigated. According to Daniel chapter 8, verse 11 and 12, the voice of inspiration is plainly telling the focal point of that vision on Daniel chapter 8 is concerning the daily and the sanctuary. And accordingly, the voice of inspiration is plainly telling here in 2SR 130, the daily and the sanctuary cast down. Daniel 8 verse 11 and verse 12. And by him the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and an host was given him against the daily by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Daniel chapter 8 verse 11 and verse 12. The main subject in Daniel chapter 8, it is concerning the exceeding great horn, and it is pertaining to the exceeding great horn that Daniel did not understand. Now let us read track number 3, page 34 and page 35. It says here, The work of the exceeding great horn was therefore what he did not understand. And so it was that later, in those days, he was again mourning, this time 3 full weeks. Whereupon he says, I saw a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Ophir. Then said he unto me, Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days. For yet the vision is for many days, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Daniel chapter 10 verse 5 and verse 12 and verse 14. And Daniel chapter 8 verse 17. That chapters 11 and 12 contain the explanation of the vision promised by the angel in chapter 10. Can be readily recognized not only from the continuity of the angel's speech, but also from the fact that these chapters are the explanation of the vision in the 8th chapter. Track number 3, pages 34 and page 35. So the shepherd's rod made it so plain that it is concerning the work of the exceeding great horn that Daniel did not understand. And accordingly, the promise made by the angel in chapter 10 to give more explanation concerning the vision on chapter 8, the explanation was found on Daniel chapter 11 and chapter 12. Now here in 2TG number 33, page 10, Daniel was then promised all the light that could be given, not only on the vision of chapter 8, but on all that is noted in the scripture of truth in connection with the vision, that which the angel showed him is recorded in chapters 11 and 12. Chapter 11, you will see, begins with the vision of chapter 8, with the kings of Medo-Persia and Grecia are symbolized by the ram and he-goat in chapter 8. Then was Daniel told that the explanation at last was sufficient, but that it was impossible for him to understand it all, for the vision was sealed to the time of the end. Chapter 12, verses 8 and 9. 2TG 33, page 10. So, although the explanation given on chapter 11 and 12 is sufficient enough to expound the subject on chapter 8, but still, the understanding was not committed to Daniel, for the vision was sealed to the time of the end. And accordingly, in 3 symbolic code, number 8 to 10, page 8, the time of the end, in more specific terms, began in the year 1844. So, the perfect fulfillment of the vision must be found during the time of the end, from 1844 onwards. Now, the shepherd's rod already told us that concerning Daniel chapter 11, the only verse that remained unfulfilled, verse 45, brother, 2TG 42 on page 27. So it says here, the only portion of Daniel 11 yet to be fulfilled is this verse, verse 45, the last of the chapter. And since these prophecies are made to be understood only when they're being fulfilled or after fulfillment, verse 45 is not as clear as we should like to have it. Consequently, concerning the place of his tabernacles and his end, also as to whether another Christian power shall inherit the title King of the North before verse 45 is fulfilled, only time itself will positively portray the whole truth. Now here the shepherd's rod is plainly telling that concerning Daniel 11 verse 45, the complete understanding was not as yet given by God to Beti-Hotep in his days. And he himself plainly told us that he has no complete understanding whether there is still another Christian nation to inherit the title King of the North. And to repeat again, the King of the North in the days of Beti-Hotep is Great Britain in particular. That is the statement given by the shepherd's rod. Now let us read the statement in 2TG number 7 on page 10. That the time of the end began in the 18th century. That the king of the south is the Ottoman Empire. That the king of the north at the present time is Great Britain in particular. But for sure, the last Christian nation to inherit the title King of the North is the United States of America, as stated in 2SR page 151. Now, it says here, therefore of him alone can it be said, it is a man. Thus whosoever shall stand at the head of that persecuting power, as described in this chapter and represented by the beast, is the one who shall bear the mystical number 666. The spirit of prophecy also states that the king of the north brought to view in Daniel 11 verse 45 and the two-horned beast of Revelation 13 is the same power, and that it shall bear this mystical number 666. Now, then it says, we quote, this power is the last that treads down the true church of God. And as the true church still trodden down and cast out by all Christendom, it follows that the last oppressive power has not come to his end, and Michael has not stood up. This last power that treads down the saints brought to view in Revelation 13, verse 11 to 18. His number is 666. Now, we know that the very first title, King of the North, is given to the Seleucid dynasty. Here in track number 12 on page, I think 63, and also on page 65. I would like to read first in page 64 and page 65. It says, in the light of these foregone fundamental facts, we should now be able to rightly evaluate the unfolding of the scroll and to intelligently match the page of prophecy with the page of history as we pass from the time of the first northern regime, that of the Lysimachia, on beyond the time of the second northern regime, that of the victorious Seleucidae, who subjugated the Lysimachian dynasty, and on to the time of the third northern regime, that of Rome, that power which overthrew the Seleucidan kingdom. So it says that the third who inherit the title King of the North is, according to this reading, is the Roman Empire, brothers and sisters. But we know, brothers and sisters, that the Roman Empire is divided into two divisions, pagan and papal Rome. Now here in the order of the number who bring the title King of the North, according to this reading, first is the Lysimachian, and second is the dynasty of Seleucus, and then the third one is pagan Rome, or we call it the Roman Empire. Therefore, the fourth who inherit the King of the North is England, according to this reading on track number 12, page 64. So, the United States of America, brothers and sisters, being the very last who will inherit the title King of the North, he must be the fifth who inherit the title King of the North. But if you will divide the Roman Empire into two divisions, pagan and then papal Rome, United States of America is the number 6 who inherit the title King of the North. Now, let us focus now our attention, brothers and sisters, in this study on the last verse of Daniel 11, verse 45. But it's according to the Shepherd's Rod in 2TG 42, page 27. The remaining verse by which it is still unfulfilled in Daniel chapter 11, and that is verse 45. And the Shepherd's Rod plainly told us on 2SR page 151, the spur prophecy also states that the King of the North brought to view in Daniel 11 verse 45, and the two-horned beast of Revelation 13 is the same power, and that it shall bear this mystical number 666. So here the Shepherd's Rod plainly told us that the power brought to view in Daniel 11 verse 45, the only verse which is still unfulfilled on Daniel 11, is the same power concerning the two-horned beast who shall bear the mystical number 666. Now, I would like to, we know the word mystical meaning full of mystery. So the number 666, the Shepherd's Rod called it mystical number or full of mystery. Now, I would like to read track number 12, page 27. Let's read the statement. The prevailing belief that the number 666 is the numerical identification of some other power is the spawn of the Prince of Darkness and is calculated to cancel, if possible, the identification of this two-horned power. Inspiration puts the number on the two-horned beast, and there we must leave it. When the number is finally made up, the servants of God will be able to convince all the wise as to just whom the beast symbolizes. We now see, though, that no one who studies the Word of God need be deceived when this power does appear on the stage of action. Yet, notwithstanding of God's warning against giving allegiance to the beast, the world fails to give heed, with the result that even after his number is made up, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Revelation 13, verse 16. The passage, if any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, denotes that all who, after hearing the truth, continue to pay homage, either religiously or secularly, to the image, shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. Revelation 14, verse 9 and verse 10. Track number 12, pages 27 and page 28. Now let's go back first to the subject concerning the exceeding great horn. Accordingly, in track number 3, on page 39, let's read again the statement. It says, "And as the great horn of the he-goat is symbolical of the Roman world, represented by the iron in Daniel 2 verse 40, in its three periods, first pagan, second ecclesiastical, and third Protestant. Also as in its second period, it trod the truth and the host underfoot and polluted the sanctuary by bringing in the abominations, while it practiced and prospered." Daniel 8 verse 12. The 2,300-day period accordingly extends beyond the fall of ecclesiastical Rome and reaches into the Protestant period. Track number 3 on page 39. Now, the shepherd's rod in that reading is plainly telling us that as the daily and the sanctuary accordingly had been trodden underfoot and polluted in the second period of the exceeding great horn, which is the ecclesiastical Rome, it is also predicted that the daily and the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot in the Protestant period. And the Bible says that it practiced and prospered. Now, we already established the fact that the Protestant period commenced in 1799. And even in that reading, in track number 3, page 39, plainly indicating that the Protestant period followed the period of ecclesiastical Rome. So it says here, let us read in 2TG number 22, page 21 and page 22. This symbolical prophecy is seen to corroborate history. It points out that the Christian church at first suffered martyrdom shown by the color red, then followed the dark ages of religion when the church was in captivity, represented by the color black. Following this came the Protestant period, the period of religious freedom, represented by the white theme. So here in 2TG number 22, pages 21 and page 22, the Protestant period is the period of religious freedom and cannot be applied to the Dark Ages because there was no freedom of religion during that period of time. So to repeat again, the Bible made it so plain that the daily and the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot in the Protestant period. And in reality, the focal point of the book of Daniel must be to the people living in the time of the end. And we already read that the time of the end commenced in 1844, according to 3 Symbolic Code number 8 to 10, page 8. Because the people in the generation during the Roman Empire, according to 2SR 111, they had no understanding concerning the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, and therefore they could not be profited by them. And also in 2TG number 7, page 3, the understanding of the book of Daniel was not given to the people prior to the time of the end. And accordingly, of all the books in the Old Testament, one which is especially mentioned of Jesus Christ is the book of Daniel in Matthew 24, verse 15 and verse 16. And Jesus Christ gave a divine command according to track number 3, page 25. Now let's read again the statement. From this juxtaposition of Daniel 8, 11, and 12 in Daniel 11, verse 31, the reader will observe that both scriptures are speaking of the same power, and Christ predicting the signs of the end of the world as we look forward along the stream of time declared, when ye, his followers, who were to be living at the time that this horn power was at work against God, against his truth and his people, therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Matthew 24, verse 15. These clear words of Christ himself, placed the work of this power in the future from his time. And to repeat again, the shepherd's rod is even more specific in track number 12, page 81, by saying, several centuries from the time Jesus Christ uttered the words. Here in track number 12, page 81, that these three links of truth, the polluting of the sanctuary, the taking away of the daily, and the placing of the abomination in the prophetic chain of events bring us several centuries into the Christian era, is conclusively confirmed by Christ referring to them as in the future from the time he uttered the command. So here the statement according to the Shepherd's Rod, it is a divine command. What is the divine command? That we need to study the book of Daniel and to understand it. And it says that when such abomination stand in the holy place, those who will be in Judea will flee into the mountains. Track number 12, page 81. To repeat again, the word several simply means that at least 3 centuries. Because the word several cannot be used if the number is less than 3. So at least 3 centuries into the Christian era. And we know a century is 100 years, or in other words, the fulfillment of the vision of Daniel in Daniel 8, 11, and 12 must be fulfilled at least 300 years from the time Jesus Christ uttered the words in 31 AD. So at least it should be on 300 AD or 331 AD. Now, since the Shepherd's had already declared, brothers and sisters, the statement in track number 3, page 39, that the fulfillment of Daniel 8, verse 11 and 12, and also Daniel 11, 31, had been fulfilled in the second period of the exceeding great horn, which is the ecclesiastical Rome. But the absolute fact is that it will also, the daily and the sanctuary will be also trodden underfoot in the Protestant period. And to repeat again, I do fully believe that the focal point of the book of Daniel is in the period of the Protestant period rather than in the period of ecclesiastical Rome. Because if the focal point is in the period of ecclesiastical Rome, then it is useless because the people in that period of time, they had no understanding concerning the book. How could they be able to comply such divine command given by Jesus Christ that those who read it, let him understand, while in reality, there is no possibility that they could be able to understand the book of Daniel at the time when God himself sealed the book that it cannot be understood. Therefore, the direct object in view, or the particular object in view, is in the third period, in the Protestant period, brothers and sisters. And since the Bible made it so plain that it will be the daily and the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot, brothers and sisters, and it practiced and prospered, prophecy must be fulfilled. Now, I would like to read the statement into SR 139. Let's read the statement. The truth expressed by the daily and the sanctuary were trodden down by reason of transgression in the period of the broken state of Rome up to 508 AD. For the imperial government came to an end in the year 476 AD. Furthermore, the papal power treats God's truth on the ground up to the termination of the prophetic 1260 years and ended with the imprisonment of the Pope in 1798. But the sanctuary and the daily were held to the ground by the great horn up to 1844. At that time, he lost control of them, and the power of the 3 angels' messages raised the truth from the ground or from underfoot and placed it in the church. Therefore, the great horn is a symbol of the entire New Testament period to the second coming of Christ, corresponding with the legs of iron in the feet and toes on the great image of Daniel. I would like to focus to the statement, brothers and sisters, that the daily and the sanctuary were held to the ground by the exceeding great horn up to 1844. And at that time, he lost control of them. And it is the power of the message of the 3 angels raised the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary from the ground, from underfoot, and placed it in the church. 2SR page 139. And for sure, the church mentioned here is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the 9th hour church. So in this reading, brothers and sisters, the Shepherd's Rod made it so plain that It is through the power of the message of the three angels that raised the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary from the ground and then place it in the church. Now, the reality is that the three angels' messages is applied in the judgment that pertains to the dead only indirectly. The direct application must be found in the judgment that pertains to the living. Now, let us read again in John Conference Special on page 39 and page 40. It says, in fact, the three angels' messages are applicable to the judgment for the dead only indirectly. For the judgment for the living is the all-important event. That is, the angel is not sent particularly to explain what the judgment does to the dead, but what it is to do to the living. And then it says, so we see that the more we consider the subject, the more obvious becomes the truth that the third angel's message in its final phase is the judgment for the living, the harvest. General Conference Special, page 39 and page 40. Now, do not forget, brothers and sisters, Son's statement in the Bible that according to the explanation of the shepherd's rod in tract number 3, page 39, that the daily and the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot also in the Protestant period. Or in other words, the shepherd's rod says that the daily and the sanctuary have been trodden underfoot in the period of the ecclesiastical Rome, the second period of the exceeding great horn, but it will also be trodden underfoot, the daily and the sanctuary, in the period of the Protestant period. Now, the mere fact that the three angels' messages are applicable to the judgment that pertains to the living, the direct application is in the judgment that pertains to the living. One of the purpose of the three angels' messages in the judgment that pertains to the living is to raise the truth from the ground. Or in other words, the daily and the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot in the period of the Protestant period or in the time of the end. But it will be rescued again. It will be restored, or it will be raised from the ground and place it in the church, because that is the only message that can restore and or rescue the truth from the ground, the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary that had been trodden underfoot by the exceeding great horn. Now, we already read several times that according to 2SR 131, it says, Jesus is speaking of the same incident says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Jesus calls the daily and the sanctuary holy place. 2SR page 131. Therefore, the Bible made it so plain that whatever the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary that had been trodden underfoot by the exceeding great horn, it is standing in the holy place, according to this reading, 2SR 131, and not in the most holy place. Now, let us read tract number 4. Here in tract number 4, on page 25 and page 26. Since these ordinances, her feast days, her Sabbaths, etc., were part of a compacted prophecy of the gospel, a presentation in which were bound up the promises of redemption, the Acts of the Apostles, page 14, and since Hosea's symbolization has brought us into the Christian era, the ceasing of the ordinances therefore typifies Rome supplanting the truth. Daniel also was shown that this was to be accomplished through Rome, the exceeding great horn, which cast down to the ground the truth and the place of his sanctuary, Christ's sanctuary. Note that the truth in the place, not the sanctuary itself, was cast down. That is, both Christ's truth and his place in the early sanctuary were set aside so that the knowledge as to his mediatorial work became obscured. Now, first of all, the only sanctuary by which Jesus Christ is performing his mediatorial work is in the heavenly sanctuary. Now here, the voice of inspiration says that the significance that the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary was cast down, meaning that concerning the mediatorial work of Jesus Christ in the heavenly sanctuary, his people has no knowledge, brothers and sisters. Now, during the dark ages of religion, the time when the daily and the sanctuary were cast to the ground, the proceedings at that time is in the holy place. because the proceedings in the most holy place commenced in October 22, 1844. But the exceeding great horn had no longer been able to hide such truth from the eyes of God's people. And that's why it says that the power of the three angels' messages restored the truth from the ground, brothers and sisters, and placed it in the church. And at that time, the church that had been raised by God, they have knowledge concerning the mediation of Jesus Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. But during Christ's mediation in the holy place, because according to the great controversy, 421, the sword prophecy made it so plain, says, for 18 centuries, this work of ministration continued in the first apartment of the sanctuary. Great controversy, 421. And we know 18 centuries meaning 1,800 years. So Jesus Christ entered into the most holy place in October 22, 1844. So it's easy to locate the commencement of Christ's mediation in the holy place by subtracting 1844 minus 1,800, and you will fall on 44 AD. Therefore, Christ's mediatorial work from 44 AD to 1844 is in the holy place. And during the Dark Ages, such mediatorial work of Jesus Christ in the heavenly sanctuary, God's people has no knowledge. It became obscured, brothers and sisters. And that is the reason that in Matthew 24, verse 15 and 16, Jesus Christ very specific that the one that had been trodden underfoot by the exceeding great horn is His mediatorial work in the holy place. But the most important part in this study, brothers and sisters, is concerning that predicted event that if the daily and the sanctuary had been trodden underfoot in the second period of the exceeding great horn, which is the ecclesiastical Rome, it will also be trodden underfoot in the Protestant period. But it could not be the mediatorial work of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary in the most holy place. Because Jesus Christ is very definite, saying that it is concerning the mediatorial work of Jesus Christ in the holy place. Now let us familiarize first concerning the sanctuary services. Now here in 2SR 187, it says, the seven seals and the sanctuary. In order to make a proper application of the seven seals, we must have a better understanding of the heavenly sanctuary service, its origin, and the object of its existence, as taught by the earthly sanctuary built by Moses. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 5. In the sanctuary construction and service is revealed the plan of salvation. 2SR page 187. Now, let us analyze closely, brothers and sisters, this reading in 2SR 187. That it utters the impossibility that you could be able to make a proper application of the subject of the seven seals unless you will have a better understanding concerning the heavenly sanctuary service, its origin, and the object of its existence, as taught by the earthly sanctuary built by Moses. Now, concerning the sanctuary that had been built in the days of Moses, brothers and sisters, according to Leviticus 16, verse 16 and 19, as explained in the great controversy on page, it says here, I think, let's read the statement here. Here the voice of inspiration is plainly telling us that both apartments, there must be a cleansing. Page 419 or 418, it says, such was the work that went on day by day throughout the year. The sins of Israel were thus transferred to the sanctuary, and a special work became necessary for their removal. God commanded that an atonement be made for each of the sacred apartments, according to Leviticus 16, verse 16 and verse 19. So in this reading, in the great controversy, page 419, both apartments, there must be removal or cleansing, brothers and sisters. And as far as the Bible and the prophecies does concern, the removal on the holy place is blotting out of names of the wicked. In reality, the cleansing of the sanctuary belongs only to the blotting out of names and not to the blotting out of sins. Because according to track number 3 on page 50 and 51, the Shepherd's Rod says clearly It says, as the cleansings of the heavenly sanctuary is a work of cleansing the books by blotting from them the names of both the backsliders and the tares, and as at the time of trouble such as never was, since there was a nation, the only ones who shall be delivered are those whose names are found written in the book. The cleansing of the books, therefore, obviously takes place before the resurrection and before the time of trouble such as never was. So here the shepherds had made it so plain that the cleansing of the books in the heavenly sanctuary must be finally cleansed or finally accomplished before the commencement of the little time of trouble, because according to the Bible in Daniel chapter 12, that at the commencement of the time of trouble, all the names found written in the Lamb's book of life will be delivered. And the shepherds had said that if God will allow the names of the wicked to the commencement of the time of trouble, then God will be obliged to save the wicked together with the righteous, because God cannot deny His own words. And it is an impossible thing. And that is why the shepherds had made it so plain that the books in the heavenly sanctuary will be completely cleansed prior to the commencement of the time of trouble. Let's read again. Tract number 5, page 110. Concerning the great multitude which no man could number. On Revelation 11 verse 2, it says, but why leave out the court? Why not measure it also? For since it is a part of the building, it too must be symbolical of saints. Obviously, because it represents the great multitude which no man could number, meaning measure, of all nations and kindreds and peoples and tongues. Revelation 7 verse 9. The last who come from among the Gentiles. The court, in other words, symbolical of the immeasurable, innumerable harvest of second fruits, brought in after the measurable, numerable harvest of first fruits, the 144,000. It is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bed to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, Daniel 8 verse 14, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good, in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net, Matthew 13 verse 47 and 48. They are those who, by name, my people, are called to come out of Babylon, and who with no unclean among them, Isaiah 52 verse 1, come into the already purified and living church of God. Tract number 5, page 110 and 111. This reading plainly told us that when the message goes to the great multitude, the constituent of the great multitude, in that period of time, brothers and sisters, the cleansing of the heavenly temple is already finished. It says that they are to be gathered out, or they are to be gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. That is very plain here in tract number 5, 110. And the very first constituent of the great multitude which no man could number are those people who will be converted during the Great Tribulation. And if you still remember in 2SR, let me read to you here in 2SR page 166, it says, therefore, this great multitude is gathered from all nations after the closing work for the church and in the time of the great harvest. The palms in their hands signify victory over the beast and his image, death and the grave. One of the elders before the throne said of them, these are they which came out of great tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. Now here the shepherds declared clearly the constituent of the great multitude mentioned in this reading are those who will be converted during the Great Tribulation. Or in other words, if you will study closely, there are 3 stages concerning the loud cry message to the constituent of the great multitude. First, during the Great Tribulation, and second, during the little time of trouble, and the last is during the great time of trouble. But those who will be converted during the great tribulations, all of them are Sabbath keepers. And that is the reason that, according to the voice of inspiration, that who by name, they are called my people. Now here in tract number 9, page 56, to gather a class defiled with women as second fruits. This class of saints must be those who have at one time been married to some unchristian mistress, a heathen church, and who consequently are not descendants of either Jacob or the Christian church. So there are to be 2 harvests, one from the church and one from the world. The record of the former mentioned only Israelites, the 144,000, those not defiled with women, though it does not say that there may not be others, while the record of the latter, however, definitely embraces a great multitude from all nations, which must necessarily be both of undefiled, defiled ones, Jews and Gentiles. So here the shepherd's rod made it so plain that the constituent of the great multitude is divided into two classes, the defiled ones and the undefiled ones. And for sure in that reading, the undefiled ones must refer to the Sabbath keepers by saying the Jews and pointing to the Sabbath keepers. Now here in tract number 3, page 71 and 72, it says, that is, they are those whom the sealing message finds in the church of God, not in the heathen churches. And the second gives the second fruits, the great multitude from all nations, some of whom also may be undefiled with women, heathen churches. Tract number 3, page 72. Now, our main objective in this study, brothers and sisters, is that first, we need to ascertain clearly that predicted event by which, at that time, all the names of the wicked that was written in the Lamb's Book of Life are completely blotted out. And such blotting out of names is done in the holy place. And that is the prediction given by the book of Daniel that the mediatorial work of Jesus Christ in the holy place had been trodden underfoot by the exceeding great horn, not only in the period of the ecclesiastical Rome, but as well as in the Protestant period. The Protestant period, according to our reading in 2 Tg 22, page 21 and 22, begin after the Dark Ages, and it is called the period of religious freedom. Now, we already read, brothers and sisters, right, in 2 SR 139, the daily and the sanctuary had been trodden underfoot in the entire period of the Dark Ages from 538 AD to 798 AD, that even up to 1844. But in 1844, through the power of the message of the three angels, it was rescued and restored and placed it in the church. Or in other words, the significance is that the exceeding great horn had no longer been able to hide the truth concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary since 1844, by which such proceeding is in the most holy place. Therefore, the Bible never teaches that when the proceeding of Jesus Christ is in the most holy place, the exceeding great horn had been able to tread down underfoot the daily and the sanctuary. The daily and the sanctuary is more pointing to Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, and it is more pertaining to Christ's mediation in the holy place, brothers and sisters. First of all, the proceedings that commenced in October 22, 1844, we call it the judgment of the dead. And it is even more pertaining to the blotting out of sins of the righteous, those who died under the first 5 seals, by which we call it the temple, brothers and sisters. But in this study, to repeat again, brothers and sisters, there are 2 inanimate objects in Revelation 11, verse 1 and 2, according to tract number 5, and that is the temple and the altar. And we know the temple are those who died under the first 5 seals, the altar, those who died under the 6th seal, and then the third one is the worshippers, which pointing to the 144,000 living saints. Remember, the great multitude will no longer pass the investigation in the holy place due to the fact that there will be no more bad to be cast out. Or in other words, at that time, the only names to be inscribed in the Lamb's Book of Life are the names of the righteous, and God will no longer allow the names of the wicked to enter in the pages of the Lamb's Book of Life from the time when the message goes to the great multitude which no man could number. And that is why, brothers and sisters, I would like to focus. Remember, we already read that there is no more damaging darkness, that the devil can keep God's people in ignorance rather than to keep them in ignorance concerning the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, while their judgment is pending they are not aware of. And here in 2 TG number 12, page 30, I would like to read again the statement here in 2 TG 12:30. Whereas the last 2 seals, meaning the 6th seal and the 7th seal, 2TG number 12, page 30, it says, whereas the last two seals, which contain the things that pertains to the judgment of the living, to the people who must know that their cases are on trial, are quiet long. Why is it that in this reading, the last two seals, which pertains to the sixth seal and the seventh seal, it says, pertain to the judgment of the living and to the people that they need to know that their cases are on trial. And that is the most damaging darkness that Satan could accomplish if we will remain in darkness and ignorance concerning such proceedings pertaining to ourselves. Because when our case is pending in the heavenly sanctuary, according to track number 3, page 54, and we are unaware of the fact, brothers and sisters, then our hope will be completely gone, my dear brothers and sisters. And that's why in the Great Controversy, I would like to read this reading again. The Great Controversy, page 518, let us read here the statement. Let me read to you. The great controversy between Christ and Satan that has been carried forward for nearly 6,000 years is soon to close, and the wicked one redoubles his efforts to defeat the work of Christ in man's behalf, and to fasten souls in his snares, to hold the people in darkness and impenitence till the Savior's mediation is ended, and there is no longer a sacrifice for sin is the object which he seeks to accomplish. And that is very sad, brothers and sisters, because I remember the vision of Sister White in the Great Controversy, page 490. Let me read to you. See the statement given by the voice of inspiration. It says, solemn are the sins connected with the closing work of the atonement. Momentous are the interests involved therein. The judgment is now passing in the sanctuary above. For many years this work has been in progress. Soon none know how soon it will pass to the cases of the living. In the awful presence of God, our lives are to come up in review. And this time above all others, it behoves every soul to heed the Savior's admonition. Watch and pray, for ye know not when the time is. Mark 13, verse 33. If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee. Revelation 3, verse 3. When the work of the investigative judgment closes, the destiny of all will have been decided for life or death. Probation is ended a short time before the appearing of the Lord in the clouds of heaven. Christ in the Revelation, looking forward to that time, declares, he that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be. Revelation 22, verse 11 and 12. The righteous and the wicked will still be living upon the earth in their mortal state. Men will be planting and building, eating and drinking, all unconscious that the final irrevocable decision has been pronounced in the sanctuary above. Before the flood, after Noah entered the ark, God shut him in and shut the ungodly out. But for 7 days, the people, knowing not that their doom was fixed, continued their careless, pleasure-loving life and mocked the warnings of impending judgment. So says the Savior, shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Matthew 24, verse 39. Silently unnoticed as the midnight thief will come the decisive hour, which marks the fixing of every man's destiny, the final withdrawal of mercy offered to guilty men. The Great Controversy, 490 and 491. Now, first of all, I would like to emphasize the verse that had been quoted here is Mark 13, verse 33. What is Mark 13, verse 33 and verse 34? Let us read another statement in the spirit of prophecy. And secondly, in this reading, the spirit of prophecy declared clearly that the irrevocable decision will be pronounced in the heavenly sanctuary, while the righteous and the wicked will still be living upon the earth in their mortal state. Brothers and sisters, in reality, the statement is more pertaining to the righteous, because there is no possibility that the wicked will be granted immortality. They will always in the mortal state. Immortality is promised only to the righteous. Now, for example, I would like to connect to you this reading, brothers and sisters, in the Spirit of Prophecy, or in 1888 message. Here in, written by Alonzo T. Jones, American Sentinel, page 379. Jesus said, the saints will be rewarded at the resurrection of the just, according to Luke 14, verse 14. The resurrection of the just takes place when Christ himself returns to the earth. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 15 to verse 17. At the coming of Christ, the saints inherit or enter into and possess the kingdom. Matthew 25, verse 31 to verse 34. And they cannot inherit it before the resurrection, for Paul says that flesh and blood, man in a mortal state, cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither that corruption inherit incorruption. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 50. Christ's kingdom is an everlasting kingdom which cannot be inherited by dying people. They must first be immortalized by the resurrection or translation. God hath chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, heirs of the kingdom which hath promised to them that love him. James 2, verse 5. Those who are rich in faith and love God are now heirs of the kingdom, and they will inherit it when Jesus comes and redeems them from the bondage of corruption. See Romans chapter 8, verse 23, and 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 4. So, the important part of that reading is that I would like to emphasize that the kingdom that God would establish, and we, the Bidian, we call it the pre-millennial kingdom. No one can inherit that kingdom in our mortal state. The only one who could inherit that kingdom are those people that had been immortalized, either by resurrection or either by translation. Therefore, the statement in the Great Controversy 490 saying that the irrevocable decision will be pronounced in the heavenly sanctuary while the righteous are still in their mortal state, showing that the irrevocable decision will be pronounced in the heavenly sanctuary prior to the time when God's people enter the kingdom of God, because they were still in their mortal state. Now, let's read Testimonies for the Church, volume 2, on page 190 and 191. And it is concerning Mark 13, Testimonies for the Church, volume 2, page 190 and 191. Jesus has left us word. Watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh. It says, at even or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. We are waiting and watching for the return of the master, who is to bring the morning, lest coming suddenly he find us sleeping. What time is he referred to? Not to the revelation of Christ in the clouds of heaven, to find a people asleep. No, but to his return from his ministration in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, when he lays off his priestly attire and clothed himself with the garments of vengeance. And when the mandate goes forth, he that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still. Now, all of us, I think, will agree the word return, meaning to go back at least second time or third time. Therefore, the statement here in Testimonies for the Church, volume 2, 190, concerning the admonition given by Jesus Christ in Mark 13, from verse 33 to verse 34. Brothers and sisters, it is pointing to the time when Jesus Christ will return to the most holy place. Therefore, it cannot be applied in 1844, because that is the first time that Jesus Christ entered into the most holy place. Therefore, the word return indicates that Jesus Christ left the most holy place and then go back. Now, for example, here in Answerer number 2 on page 68, beginning from page 67, it says, when will he leave the sanctuary? So this is the question. The shepherd's rod seems to say that Jesus will leave the most holy place at the execution of the slaughter of Ezekiel 9, while early writings, page 36, seems to say that he will leave the place after his work in the sanctuary is done, and then will come the 7 last plagues. How do you reconcile the two? Answer. Though the author of early writings says that Christ will not leave the sanctuary before his work is done, yet elsewhere she writes, they will feed upon upon the errors and mistakes and faults of others until, say the angel, the Lord Jesus shall rise up from his mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, and shall clothe himself with the garments of vengeance, and surprise them at their unholy feast, and they will find themselves unprepared for the marriage supper of the Lamb. Testimonies, Volume 5, page 690, it says, viewing the question in the light of both statements, we see that Christ leaves the sanctuary at a certain time in the unrolling of the scroll. Coming to the church, he finds her not spotless and ready to meet him, but deep in sin, yet self-complacently feeding upon the errors, faults, and mistakes of others. Answerer number 2, page 67 and page 68. Now, this reading, it says, I would like to emphasize again a statement. Viewing the question in the light of both statements, we see that Christ leaves the sanctuary, pointing to the most holy place, at a certain time, in the unrolling of the scroll. So, the certain time mentioned here is the unrolling of the scroll. And the scroll never unrolls, brothers and sisters, without a messenger. You need to ever remember, to repeat again, the statement unrolling of the scroll, there was no such occurrences that the scroll unrolls, by which at that time there is no human channel, by which the unrolling of the scroll is channeled by God. Now, it says here, viewing the question in the light of both statements, we see that Christ leaves the sanctuary at a certain time in the unrolling of the scroll. And it says, coming to the church, he finds her not spotless and ready to meet him, but deep in sin, yet self-complacently feeding upon the errors, faults, and mistakes of others. Answerer number 2, page 68. Now, here's another statement that I would like to read, brothers and sisters. To repeat again, we need to ascertain clearly the exact period of time, that irrevocable decision that will be pronounced in the heavenly sanctuary. First of all, in the Great Controversy 490, the verse that had been quoted is Mark 13. And in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, 190, Mark 13, the prophet says, what time is he referred to? No, it is not the coming of Christ in the clouds of heaven, but rather to his return from his ministration into the most holy place. And we emphasize that the word return shows that from 1844, October 22, when he entered to the most holy place, he leave the most holy place, then go back. That's what it means by the word return, brothers and sisters. And that is the time by which Jesus Christ will clothe himself with the garments of vengeance. And that is why it is also closely connected to the subject, the seven seals, by which in the fifth seal, the seven trumpets rather, by which on the fifth trumpet, God deferred his vengeance to grace. But when the 5 symbolical months will expire, brothers and sisters, that is the time by which the period of grace that had been given by God will also expire, brothers and sisters. And that is the period which is called the days of vengeance. So now let us read another statement in track number 1. It says here in track number 1, page 12, let's read the statement. In the clear light of these facts, chapter 9 is seen to hold the climactic scene of the vision, describing the awful work which the Lord is to do when, with the cherubim, he visits the earth. It shows the first some consequences to those who reject its message, its blessings miss, the kingdom lost. Tragic, frightful experience it shall be the fate of all who refuse now to awake and to know about it, but who choose rather to remain in ignorance of its truth and of the object of the Lord's coming in his throne. As the prophet was looking toward the north, he saw a great cloud coming like a whirlwind to earth. Watching with intense interest, it's drawing nearer and nearer. Finally he saw the living creatures, the wheels and the rest, the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Whereupon I fell, he says, upon my face, and I heard the voice of the one that spake, and mystically the Lord himself come to give a message to Ezekiel. Track number 1, page 12 and page 13. Now think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. This statement in track number 1, page 12 and page 13. For sure, if you will only study closely, this prophetic event had not been fulfilled in the days of Bethel. There might be expectation of the prophet that such event was realized in their days, but if you will look at the reality, brothers and sisters, that event is still unfulfilled, brothers and sisters. Now, in track number 1 on page 5, it says, the call of Ezekiel to the prophetic office is one of the most interesting experiences of the ancient seers, and the revelation of what he saw by the river Chibar is perhaps of greater importance to heaven and earth at this time than is any other vision on sacred record, because in a remarkable way it reveals that which unites heaven with earth, even as the Dardanelles links two important seas. Thus, this study of Ezekiel's vision, which brings to light earth being visited by the majesty of the universe, may be aptly termed the Dardanelles of the Bible. Now, it is concerning Ezekiel chapter 1. Now look at track number 3. Here in track number 3, pages 47 and page 48, it says, inescapably therefore, the Lord's coming to His temple, Malachi 3 verse 1 to 3, His coming with all His angels, Matthew 25, and His coming enthroned above the living creatures, Ezekiel chapter 1, all three representing the same event as has been shown, take place at the beginning of the judgment of the living, the time in which the judicial activities of the heavenly sanctuary extend to the earthly, the church. Track number 3, page 47 and page 48. Now here the Shepherd's Rod made so plain that Malachi 3 verse 1 to 3 and also Matthew 25 and Ezekiel chapter 1, all three representing the same event. Ezekiel 1, Malachi 3, 1 to 3, and Matthew 25, all three representing the same event as has been shown, take place at the beginning of the judgment of the living. Now, let me read to you first concerning the statement, the beginning of the judgment of the living. Here in 2SR page 171, it says here, the sealing of the 144,000 is at the closing of the judgment of the dead and at the beginning of the judgment of the living. Now, I would like to read again, 2SR page 171. The sealing of the 144,000 is at the closing of the judgment of the dead and at the beginning of the judgment of the living. So, the sealing of the 144,000 is at the beginning of the judgment of the living. And the statement in track number 3, page 47 and page 48, plainly telling us that the fulfillment of the vision in Malachi 3 verse 1 to 3 and Matthew 25 and Ezekiel chapter 1 take place at the beginning of the judgment of the living, by which that is the period of time by which the 144,000 are to be sealed, brothers and sisters. Now think it thoroughly. The one who will gather the 144,000 is Jesus Christ. Right? In 2TG, let me read to you. Here in 2TG number 44 on page 37, quoting Revelation 14, verse 14 to 19. Now the quotation here is Revelation 14, verse 14 to verse 19. It says, here we are again told that there are two reapings, one by the Son of Man and another by an angel. The reaping by the Son of Man precedes the reaping by the angel. The Son of Man therefore gathers the first fruits. 2TG 44, page 37. So the voice of inspiration says, it is Jesus Christ who will gather the first fruits. And the quotation was Revelation 14, verse 14 and verse 19. Now, if you will look at track number 3 concerning Revelation 14, verse 14 and 19, in track number 3, page 48, it says, Revelation 14, verse 14 to 16. This coming of the Son of Man is plainly, therefore, not when the resurrected and the living righteous are called up together to meet Him in the air. For verses 17 to 20, following the ones quoted in the paragraph above, reveal that after He came and reaped the earth, another angel having a sharp sickle come and reap a second harvest. Before the wrath of God, the 7 last plagues, Revelation 15 verse 1, was poured out upon the wicked. Now, think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. Revelation 14 verse 14 to 16, by which the Shepherd's Rod is plainly telling that this coming of the Son of Man is plainly not the second visible coming of Jesus Christ. Because accordingly, from the verses followed in verse 17 to 20, it says that after Jesus Christ came and reaped the earth, another angel having a sharp sickle came and reaped a second harvest. Therefore, that coming of Jesus Christ, the purpose is to harvest the first fruits, the 144,000. Now, to connect track number 1, it says here, because it is very important. Let's read in track number 1, pages 10 and page 11, or page 10. It says, "This is the living creature," continues Ezekiel, "that I saw under the God of Israel, who is above the cherubims, by the river of Chibar. And I know that they were the cherubims. And the cherubims lifted up their wings and mounted up from the earth in my sight." Ezekiel 10, verse 20 and 19. As the chariots mounting up from the earth shows that in this particular throne, God visits the earth. I would like to read again. As the chariots mounting up from the earth shows that in this particular throne, so the throne mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 1, which is called the traveling throne, it says, God visits the earth, and then when His mission is accomplished, returns to heaven. Now, this returning to heaven, is it the returning of Jesus Christ to the most holy place? When He, according to the voice of inspiration, when He clothed Himself with the garments of vengeance and then pronounced the irrevocable decision? Let us study closely, brethren. Now, I would like to read again. It says, "As the chariots mounting up from the earth shows that in this particular throne, God visits the earth, and then when His mission is accomplished, returns to heaven." Now, what is the mission? Because when the mission is accomplished, returns to heaven. So, I would like to read this reading in track number 1 on pages 36 and page 37. It says, "That the all-happy hour is approaching, when we shall mount up in this most glorious chariot, so stirs our hearts as to cause us fairly to shout the questions. When will this chariot arrive? How long will it stay?" When considered in the light of the 4 main facts so far established, these questions are virtually self-answering. Number 1, the Lord comes to earth in this chariot. From it, He commands Ezekiel to go to speak to His people. Third, Ezekiel did not bear the message to the people of his day. Fourth, he will bear it to the people at the commencement of the loud cry. Now, I would like to repeat again, according to our reading, that one of the main objective of that visitation of Christ on this earth is to give message to Ezekiel, according to track number 1, page 13, saying, "Unmistakably, the Lord Himself come to give a message to Ezekiel." And when Ezekiel will bear that message in page 37, he will bear it to the people at the commencement of the loud cry. But the voice of inspiration says here in track number 1 on page, now let me read to you, page 14, "These mandatory words of weighty significance to all reveal that the message which the prophet received is only for God's people, and that therefore by logic extension the intervision of which it is a part meets its fulfillment at a time in which the Lord sends forth the warning that because His church is at very low ebb of spirituality, impudent and hard-hearted, and a rebellious house, He will do within it a work of marking and slaying, and in all the Bible there is to be found in but one church a situation as to condition, cause, time, and result answering to that of the prophecy, and that is in the Laodicean church." So since the message that had been given by Jesus Christ, that was given to Ezekiel, is to the Laodicean church, to the 12 tribes, spiritual Israel, brothers and sisters, and he will, and the message that had been given by God to him will be proclaimed at the commencement of the loud cry. That loud cry could not be to the great multitude because the message is intended to God's people. And it says here in track number 1, page 20, "Since the purification or the sealing came at the commencement of the loud cry, as we have already seen, the 144,000 are therefore the first fruits, the first to be sealed." So it says, the commencement of the loud cry is the sealing of the 144,000. Therefore, that statement that when the mission will be accomplished, Jesus Christ will return to heaven or to the heavenly sanctuary, the mission of Christ at that time is to sell the 144,000 and gather the 144,000, brothers and sisters, according to our reading. Therefore, it cannot be applied to the 7 days slaughtering because at that time, for sure, the 144,000 are already completely sealed. Now, let us go back to reading concerning Malachi chapter 3. In 2SR, let me read to you, page 184, it says, "The description by Daniel applies to the commencement of the judgment for the dead, but the one by Malachi 3 verse 1 to 3 is applicable to the judgment for the living, all of the same event, the Day of Atonement, cleansing of the sanctuary." Now, here we can immediately discern that the coming mentioned in Malachi 3 verses 1 to 3 could not be the 7 days slaughtering, half-hour silence, because the 7 days slaughtering, half-hour silence will occur on the Passover week, but the coming mentioned here is occurred on the Day of Atonement, and the Day of Atonement is on October 10, whereas the Passover week, that is in the month of April, the first month in the Bible. So to repeat again, brothers and sisters, let us distinctly separate the occurrence during the half-hour silence or the 7 days slaughtering, by which according to 2SR, that will occur during the Passover week. Here in 2SR, page 216, it says, "In observance of the Passover, the Lord commanded Israel to celebrate that occasion 7 days. Surely no one would say that God commanded his people to commemorate that event 7 days with no object in view. Israel after the flesh, going into Egypt, then out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, the Passover in Egypt on the night when the death angels smote the firstborn of man and beast at the departure of Israel, are types of the church at the present time, the church going out of Egypt, worldliness, the purification of the church, the separation of the tares from the wheat, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. And it says, this word prophecy bears witness of this by the following statement: the Passover was to be both commemorative and typical, not only pointing back to the deliverance from Egypt, but forward to the greater deliverance which Christ was to accomplish in freeing his people from the bondage of sin." So in this reading, in 2SR 2016 and 2017, the 7 days slaughtering will occur during the Passover week. But the coming mention in Malachi 3 verses 1 to 3 is the Day of Atonement. Now I would like to read again. And the other difference that, according to track number 3, page 47 and page 48, that the fulfillment of Malachi 3, 1 to 3 and Ezekiel chapter 1 and Matthew 25 takes place at the beginning of the judgment of the living, at the time when the judicial activities in the heavenly sanctuary is extended to the earthly sanctuary, the church. Therefore, at that time, there is a proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. But during the 7 days slaughtering, there was no proceedings because the judgment at that time was adjourned, according to the reading in 2SR page 216. Now let us read again here in 2SR 184. "The description by Daniel applies to the commencement of the judgment for dead, but the one by Malachi 3 verse 1 to 3 is applicable to the judgment for the living, all of the same event, Day of Atonement, cleansing of the sanctuary." Now, I would like to go back again, brothers and sisters, to the cleansing of the sanctuary in the holy place. If you will read 2SR, let us read again. In 2SR page 184, it says, "The virgins were called to meet him, and thus by faith go in with him to appear before the Father, the great judge. The seal is the permit. It places their names in the Lamb's book of life, and thus it grants to them the right to appear before the Father in the judgment, not in person, but in figure, thus having their sins blotted out." Now, the shepherds had made it so plain that the only one who could enter the most holy place by which God the Father is sitting are those people by which they have the permit, which is the seal of the living God, brothers and sisters. And the seal of the living God can never be placed to the wicked. And that is why in 2TG number 42, that statement that there is a door that only the righteous had been able to enter therein, that door is the door to the most holy place. Here in 2TG 42, page 31, again in verse 47 and 48, Christ draws a parallel between the church and net, the people he likens to fish, and the purifications to a separation, whereas in Matthew 25, he calls the purified church the kingdom of God, and the people he likens unto virgins, and the cleansing he illustrates by a door, which lets in the wise but keeps out the foolish. 2TG 42, page 31. Now, that door by which only the wise virgins, the righteous, had been able to enter therein, that is the door to the most holy place. And here in 2SR, there's another statement that I would like to read. Here in 2SR, page 192, it says, "Only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life are brought into the presence of God in the most holy place." And who are they? Let us read to the next paragraph. I would like to read again. "Only those whose names are written in in the Lamb's Book of Life are brought into the presence of God in the most holy place. The book sealed with 7 seals in the right hand of great judge must contain the names of those whose sins are to be blotted out. And who are they whose sins to be blotted out? Only the righteous. The sins of the wicked will never be blotted out, but rather opposite, their names will be blotted out instead of their sins. That's why here in 2SR page 199, I would like to read it, says, the light and truth which they have kept, 7 lamps, the reward is to be granted to those who are judged, sea of glass, and the book containing the names of all the righteous, beginning with Adam and on to the close of provision, the end of the gospel, 7 seals. And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside sealed with 7 seals, because the book contains the names of all who are sealed with the seal of God, his truth. It is called the Book of Seals, also the Lamb's Book of Life. So in this reading, 2SR page 199, very plain that only the names of all the righteous that had been written in that Lamb's Book of Life sealed with 7 seals. Or in other words, there are 2 Lamb's Book of Life. The Lamb's Book of Life, the other is not sealed with 7 seals, but the other is sealed with 7 seals. And in that Lamb's Book of Life, not sealed with 7 seals, it is a mixed multitude. The names of the wicked had been able to enter therein. And that's why he in track number 3, page 7, that not every name that has been entered into the Lamb's books, you see that is plural, will be retained there, is borne out with sad conclusiveness by the following scripture. And it says, accordingly, the books contain the names of a mixed multitude. So it is a mixed multitude. But there is a day of reckoning, brothers and sisters, by which all the names of the wicked will be blotted out according to the voice of inspiration. Here in page 8, track number 3, page 8. So there must come a day of reckoning, a day when the names of those who are found unworthy of eternal life will be blotted out of the Lamb's Book of Life, a proceeding for which the only correct term can be investigative judgment. Track number 3, page 8. And that investigative judgment is in the holy place. And that is the fruit by which the devil trodden underfoot, meaning he had been able to hide in the minds of God's people. First, during the ecclesiastical Rome during the Dark Ages, and second, during the Protestant period. But in the Protestant period, brothers and sisters, it is more specifically pointing to the time during the sealing of the 144,000. And that is the beginning of the judgment of the living. But for sure, through the power of the 3 angels' messages, that truth will be rescued, brothers and sisters, and the minds of God's people will be opened, and they could clearly see the proceedings in the holy place. Now, I remember here in Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection, it says here, let us read. And I love so much this reading in page 120, Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection. It says, the times of refreshing. It says, the times of refreshing. Now in this time of the consummation of the hope of all the ages, in this time when the true sanctuary is truly to be cleansed, in this time when the work of the gospel is to be completed, and the mystery of God indeed finished, now is the time of all the times that ever were in the world, when the believers in Jesus, the blessed objects of His glorious priesthood and wondrous intercessions in the true sanctuary, shall be partakers of the full measure of His heavenly grace, and shall have in their lives transgression finished, an end of sins, and reconciliation for iniquity made forevermore, and in the perfection of truth, everlasting righteousness brought in. There's another statement I would like to read here in the Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection on page 104. The time of finishing the mystery of God. But that imposture is not to last forever. Thank the Lord. This great truth of the priesthood, ministry, and sanctuary of Christianity is not to be hid forever from the eyes of the church and the world. The mystery of iniquity arose and so hid from the world the mystery of God, that all the world followed its wandering. Revelation 13 verse 3 and 4. But the day comes when the mystery of iniquity shall be exposed, and the mystery of God in its own truth and purity shall shine forth once more, never more to be hid, but to accomplish its great purpose and and be completely finished. For it is written that in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants, the prophets. Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection, page 104. Or in other words, brothers and sisters, let us come together and study closely before that predicted event by which all the names of the wicked will be blotted out. And the reason that we are studying to us to be very certain that our names will never be blotted out. Here in track number 3 on page 73 and page 74, it says, being the Day of Atonement in type for both the dead and the living, this service of the earthly tabernacle therefore projects the Day of Atonement in its antitype, the cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven from unworthy names in the books, and the cleansing of the church on earth from its unconverted and unstable members, thus bringing the time of clean books, clean church, and clean people. To repeat again, saying thus bringing the time of clean books. When that would be clean books? That is before the loud cry message to the great multitude. Because we already read in track number 5, 110, 111, that the great multitude will be brought in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, and they will be brought into the already purified church of God, purified living church of God. Here in track number 5, 110 and 111, it says, because it represents those among whom there are no bed to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. So before the commencement of the loud cry to the great multitude, brothers and sisters, and to repeat again, we need to be very familiar to the constituent of the great multitude. There are constituent of the great multitude that will be converted during the great tribulation. And there are constituent of the great multitude to be converted during the little time of trouble. And there are constituent of the great multitude to be converted in the great time of trouble. And first, pertaining to the Sabbath keepers, the undefiled ones, as mentioned in track number 3, right? On page 72, and also in track number 9 on page 56, by which we already read those passages, brothers and sisters, concerning the great multitude to be converted during the great tribulation, as stated in 2 SR 166. They will pass as stated in the Bible in Revelation 7 verse 14. Now, to repeat again, brothers and sisters, one of the most important thing in this study is that to be very certain that our names will be left in the Lamb's Book of Life. In 1 TG, I would like to read first early writings. Here in early writings and in the vision of the prophet, in page 38, it says here, I saw 4 angels who had a work to do on the earth and were on their way to accomplish it. Jesus was clothed with priestly garments. He gazed in pity on the remnant, then raised his hands, and with a voice of deep pity cried, My blood, Father, my blood, my blood, my blood. Then I saw an exceeding bright light come from God, who sat upon the great white throne, and was shed all about Jesus. Then I saw an angel with a commission from Jesus, swiftly flying to the 4 angels who had a work to do on the earth, and waving something up and down in his hand, and crying with a loud voice, Hold, 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 until the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads. I asked my accompanying angel the meaning of what I heard, and what the 4 angels were about to do. He said to me that it was God that restrained the powers, and that he gave his angels charge over things on the earth, that the 4 angels had power from God to hold the 4 winds, and that they were about to let them go. But while their hands were loosening, and the 4 winds were about to blow, the merciful eye of Jesus gazed on the remnant that were not sealed, and he raised his hands to the Father, and pleaded with him that he had spilled his blood for them. Then another angel was commissioned to fly swiftly to the 4 angels, and bid them hold until the servants of God were sealed with the seal of the living God in their foreheads. Early Writings, page 38. Notice, according to the statement of the prophecy, say, the merciful eye of Jesus gazed on the remnant that were not sealed. You see, the 144,000 at this time, they are called remnant even at the time when they were not yet sealed. Why is it that they are called remnant at the time by which they were not yet sealed? It says, the merciful eye of Jesus gazed on the remnant that were not sealed. Now, I would like to read first in 1 SR, page 102. the definition of remnant is, so what constitutes the remnant? Then it says, the definition of remnant is that which is left after the separation, removal, or destruction of a part. So that is the definition of a remnant. According to the Voice of Inspiration, it says, I would like to read again. The definition of remnant is that which is left after the separation, removal, or destruction of a part. Now, why is it that the 144,000 are called remnant even in the time by which they are not yet sealed? Now, let us connect the statement in 1 TG. It says here in 1 TG, this is the statement given by the Voice of Inspiration. Timely greetings, 1 TG number 6, page 38. It says, Isaiah 4 verse 3, And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion, and he that remaineth in Jerusalem, shall be called holy, even everyone that is written among the living in Jerusalem. Then it says, only the holy ones, those whose names are left written in the book, escape the destruction that falls upon the wicked in the church. Only they constitute the remnant, the ones that are left. So here the Shepherd's Rod made it so plain in 1 TG number 6, page 38, that they are called remnant because they are the only ones that had been left in the Lamb's Book of Life among the living. According it says, even everyone that is written among the living in Jerusalem. So it points out to the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. That at the time when the blotting out of names is completely finished, brothers and sisters, the 144,000 at that time were not yet sealed, according to the vision in early writings, page 38. And that is why, brothers and sisters, I would like to emphasize to the brethren that our attitude towards present truth. I remember here in 2SR page 198 is the statement. It says, our attitude towards present truth would either make a tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and his fruit corrupt, for the tree is known by his fruit. Thus, present truth has the power to change the individual and to fit him for eternal life, which is the seal of the living God. Say, Jesus, verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he can enter into the kingdom of God. John 3, verse 5. But I would like to emphasize the reading, our attitude towards present truth. I think the same statement in track number 7. It says here, track number 7, page 68. Let ministers and people remember that the gospel truth ruins if it does not save. Testimonies, volume 5, page 134. Consequently, our salvation, our fitness for His eternal kingdom, lies in our accepting the message which the Lord sends us. I would like to read again, track number 7, page 68. Consequently, our salvation, our fitness for His eternal kingdom, lies in our accepting the message which the Lord sends us. And that is the statement, track number 7, page 68. And remember, brothers and sisters, it is only new truth. Here in 1SR, the statement I would like to read here in 1SR on page 123, it says, the meaning of the symbol of drinking the water with barley cakes is that souls were to be saved by its new truth, the Spirit of life. So, souls were to be saved by its new truth. And we know new truth is pointing to the present truth, the newly revealed truth. In track number 5, page 14, it says, only new truth can open their eyes. Only new truth can open our eyes, brothers and sisters. And I love so much the statement in track number 7, page 62. It says here, track number 7, page 62, it says, whereas God's true people have always bound themselves to new and unpopular truths, which, while new, the self-styled men of experience have denounced as heresies. Track number 7, page 62. But the observe is that in 2TG number 11, on page 10, B.T. Hotep says here in 2TG number 11, page 10, that instead of the purpose of the new truth is to, it says here, at the times when new truths had been introduced, millions have lost out only because they were too well satisfied with what they had. They saw need of nothing better, or else they were too proud to accept unpopular truth from one of God's own appointed messengers. Thus it is that when God sends a message, rather than it being to them a step upward toward salvation, it has been and still is to many a step downward toward damnation. 2TG number 11, page 10. Now, I would like to repeat again, brothers and sisters, Malachi 3 verses 1 to 3, according to 2SR 184, is pointing to the Day of Atonement. And that Day of Atonement is the blotting out of names. And God will not blot out the names without sending first a heavenly summons. And that's why here in 2SR 164, it says here, I would like to read 2SR page 164. This is the statement given by this shepherd's rod. When the judgment opened in 1844, as previously explained, the investigation began with the dead. And when that part of the work is finished, then commences the judgment of the living. While the investigation for the congregation of the dead is in progress, there can be no separation among the congregation of the living. But when our high priest shall begin the atonement for the living, there must be a message of present truth, sounding of the trumpet, urging everyone to lay hold on the lambs of God, represented by Christ, by which only can he in figure come to the sanctuary, confess his sin, and secure his life. Unless the close of the judgment for the dead and the commencement for the living be made known to us, we would have no present truth while the judgment for the living is in session. Neither would such judgment be legal or just. He who fails to respond to the heavenly summons will be left without the seal or covering of God, and therefore must be cut off from among his people, as prefigured by the services in the typical Day of Atonement. 2SR page 164. So the statement will be cut off, meaning their names will be blotted out on that antitypical Day of Atonement. And brothers and sisters, I would like to say that this is the very year, on this very year, the blotting out of names will be fulfilled, brothers and sisters. And that is the reason why we are proclaiming this message before everything is too late. Remember, brothers and sisters, the illustration given is the same as in the days of Noah. And here in 2SR page 183, it says here, and while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Afterward came also the other virgins, saying, the Lord, Lord, open unto us. But he answered and said, verily I say unto you, I know you not. As the foolish virgins at last came to the door, it is evident that they obtained the oil, meaning learned of the message, but there had been a delay. The door was shut and they were left out. Now, why were they unconcerned at first and very zealous at last? The experience in this instance is about the same as that of the deluge. While Noah preached the coming of the flood, the world paid little attention to his message, but those who believed went into the ark at a given time, and the door was closed. But not long afterwards, signs of Noah's prediction appeared, and as drops of rain began to fall, the wicked multitude became alarmed and rushed for the ark, but the door was closed and they were left out. The door that was shut is a symbol showing that probation for the church had closed just shortly after the foolish virgins became alarmed. At last they were willing to pay the price. At last they were willing to pay the price and buy the oil, but it was not a change of heart, only the fear of losing out. Their course of action had left them without the seal. The man with the rather inkhorn had passed them by. What a terrible mistake. What a disappointment. Almost saved, but entirely lost. 2SR 183 and 184. To repeat again, brothers and sisters, the mere fact that I fully believe that what the Bible teaches is the reality. That in the period, the Protestant period, the exceeding great horn also trod underfoot the daily and the sanctuary. Meaning, Christ's mediatorial work in the holy place become obscured, that God's people had no understanding concerning about it. And what is Christ's mediatorial work in the holy place? That is the blotting out of names. They have no knowledge at all when thus the blotting out of names will be carried out, or such proceeding, brothers and sisters, in the heavenly sanctuary. And the devil is determined to keep God's people in darkness concerning about it. And it is the most damaging darkness, according to White House Recruiter, page 31 and page 32. But thank God, our Heavenly Father, because through the power of the three angels' messages in the judgment that pertains to the living, by which such message is directly applied, the truth had been rescued and restored from the ground and placed it in the church. What church? The 11th hour church, brothers and sisters. The last church in the New Testament succession, the house of David. So we will continue this subject, brothers and sisters, and hoping that every one of us will abide listening and viewing this program. And we are praying that this message will find lodgment in our hearts, brothers and sisters. Thank you very much, and may the good Lord bless you and have a wonderful evening.